Technology is a very vast landscape. If you go about it in the right way, you can derive a lot of things. That would happen only if programming is ultimately a skill. Engineering is a way of thinking. These are two very different things. People often conflate software engineering, let me just build a product, I'm a software engineer. That's not true. And programming, like in my personal experience, is less than 10 to 15% of what a software engineer actually does. To be good at building products, you need to understand the domain that you are in, which means habituating yourself to learning a lot more about how the world works beyond just the technical knowledge. Don't limit yourself to labels of software engineer or, software or software versus hardware. Oh, hardware is not my thing, so I shouldn't spend time studying that. Don't limit yourself. You've got to make sure that you are liberating yourself to learn anything and everything under the sun. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Firstly, thanks for having me. This is the second time I'm here for commencement. I was very privileged to be invited to the first commencement, and in that commencement, there's a bunch of things that I ended up sharing with the new students. There were 4 broad truths that I talked about, which have stood the test of time for me, with the hope that students end up using those truths to better use the time that they have at Scala. Those 4 things that I shared with them one was that looking at this time they have here as a process of learning how to learn. And, it sounds a bit like meta learning, but, that's really what the core essence of what it means to actually be studying in an engineering college. The second thing that I talked about was foundations have a much more longevity to it than skills. And in college, you would end up learning both, but often enough, students end up over-indexing on skills than foundations. And, that tends to show up in their career trajectory at a later point in time. The third truth that I shared was only 20% of your future is going to be determined by the college. 80% is going to be what you end up doing, how you end up making use of your time in college. And I shared a bunch of examples around it. So that was the third truth that I shared in the previous commencement speech. The fourth one was knowledge gathering is not a zero-sum game. I entered a little late. I heard zero-sum word, and I assume that the same concept was actually being shared with you. Knowledge building is not a zero-sum game. It's actually best done in a community. So those were the 4 truths that I ended up sharing. For today, I would end up largely repeating the same points, but in different words. And it may seem like I'm reducing my effort, but in reality, these are so fundamental truths that, I can just keep on repeating it. Plus also the fact that most students would hear it out, you would remember it for a day or 2, and then you'll forget about it. Okay, so that's also, a very, very common occurrence. All the more reason why, I like to keep repeating the same truths. All right. So with that in mind, let's start with undoing some common misconceptions and other damages that you've gone through by the Indian school system. The first one is about marks. In school, that is the proxy that we end up using to determine how knowledgeable you are. And the same thing shows up in your admission system and stuff like that. I've heard from Abhimanyu and Anshuman that they have a slightly richer admission process, which again reflects the fact that marks on their own just capture one axis of knowledge. Often enough, what students end up doing in colleges is repeating the same behavior that they have seen in school. That if you're topping your class, It has a higher chance of getting admiration and respect from the teachers and whatnot. Um, Real world is not like that. Okay, it tends to be, it's not like you can show one number to somebody and hope to impress them. Okay, in fact, it's so common that there's a name for it. It's called the Goodhart's law. You guys might actually end up coming across it every now and then, which says that when a measure becomes a target, it fails to be a good measure. Okay, so when marks become your goal, you end up there are multiple paths to getting high marks, and it's very easy to choose the wrong paths that actually don't go through a foundation of understanding. Okay, so that's one thing to remember to undo. You have to consciously undo that learning that Indian education system has put you through. Okay, that's not to say marks are not important, but it has to be an output of what you have truly learned. All right. To repeat the same point, a year into your career, nobody would remember your marks. Okay, but everybody would remember what you built. So just absolutely drill it as early as you can in your heads that marks have a role to play, but do not do a first degree optimization for marks. Okay. The second misconception that people have is predictability. In school, what we go through is so long as you cleared a certain cutoff mark, you move into the next class, right? There is predictability. In real life, there is no predictability. Okay? All you can do is prepare yourself really well, but in reality, a whole bunch of factors need to come together to actually make you succeed. Okay, this is a lesson that most likely is going to fall on deaf ears, and you'll have to go through your own learning about it. I'm just planting it in your head right now, so that at whatever point in time this lesson comes your way, hopefully these words end up getting reinforced. The third one is that school system gets you habituated to learning somebody else's learning. Okay? You don't get to learn as much of how to figure out what questions to ask, how to truly understand something. There's a formula that would end up being shared with you, and you end up being told, this is how things are. Okay? And the trouble with that is you have a whole collection of rules that you have to remember, instead of truly understanding something and letting the rules be a derivative of those foundational understanding. You have to remember a whole bunch of rules. Okay, how many of you had maths as a favorite subject? How many of you had inorganic chemistry as a favorite subject? Okay, right? So the difference in hands is very, very obvious, and the reason is simple, that at least inorganic chemistry, without quantum understanding, can actually be a large collection of arbitrary rules. You think you figured out a formula to derive something, yet one day you'll come across an exception to that, right? It's just, the exception is the rule in organic chemistry, right? So that is what I mean to say, that when life becomes a collection of arbitrary rules, we stop feeling joy about that thing. And technology is a very vast landscape, so it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the number of things you're having to learn. But if you go about it in the right way, you can derive a lot of things. Okay, but that would happen only if you are extremely well versed with the foundations of your domain. Okay, so the last misconception that I wanted to clear, that I wanted to talk about, was programming as an equivalent for engineering. Okay, it's a very, very common misconception. Programming is ultimately a skill. Engineering is a way of thinking. These are two very different things, and it's worth to sort of double click on this. So let's generalize programming versus engineering to a more general difference. between training versus education. Okay, Richard Hamming is one of the greats in our field. In fact, there's a fantastic book by him called The Art of Doing Science and Engineering. Abhimanyu was asking me about book suggestions for library, and I feel that's one book by Richard Hamming that should absolutely be there, because it talks about the way of thinking around engineering. Okay, in that book, he makes a comment. Let me make sure I'm quoting it right. Education is what, when, and why to do things. Training is how to do it. Either one without the other is not of much use. Okay? The education part is what, when, why. Those are the foundational understanding, the theoretical concepts, the framework of thinking. All of these things is what education is. Training is the how part. For example, how do you tell a computer what to do? Okay? Which is where a lot of, for example, programming, just programming as a skill or learning a new language comes into the picture. Okay, this is such a crucial difference, and yet, we students often end up missing out, confusing the two. Some examples of the difference: bricklaying. Okay, let's say you want to build a bridge. You will need to learn some basics of masonry, right? You know how to lay out the bricks on top of each other, etc. Right? That is the how part. Okay. The what and the why part is figuring out, how strong the foundation should be. What should be the width of my foundation? What material do I need to be using? That stems from a deeper understanding of characterizing the strength parameters of a bridge. That is where your education comes into picture. Okay, people often conflate software engineering. Let me just build a product. I'm a software engineer. That's not true. That's what a programmer does. Okay, and programming, like in my personal experience, is less than 10 to 15% of what a software engineer actually does. Okay, it's the complexity of how different pieces interact with each other that actually makes software engineer, good at their job. Okay. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Another example is knowing C versus being able to write an operating system kernel. Okay, knowing the language C is a skill, whether you can program in C or not. But how to write an efficient scheduler is something that comes with a deeper understanding of kernel. That requires a fair bunch of foundational theoretical understanding of things. All right. So these are, those are some examples of the engineering versus programming, or training versus education in general. Things end up becoming more complicated because often enough in the market, you would see companies hire for training. Okay, which means that company's job description would be, you need to know Java, or you need to know Kubernetes, or you need to know blah, blah, blah. Okay, some XYZ framework or something like that. So the job descriptions tend to often over-index on training. Okay, which is one reason why students often end up getting distracted by way too much around the training part, which is the how to do things part, and completely miss out on the what, when, why, the education part of it. Okay. So because companies often tend to over-index on training, students end up moving towards that direction, and that eventually shows up as a cost in longevity in their career. Okay, because skills and frameworks go up and down. In the tech industry, within 5 years, the framework in fashion changes. Okay, in 10 years, something completely different would show up. If you are not good in your foundations, you will have struggle adapting. And this is one reason why you would often see people going down the managerial path, because ho gaya 5 saal ke baad, my ability to sort of be deeply familiar with technology goes down. So I'll just move on to the managerial path. Okay, I hope that at least some of you choose to continue to be extremely strong engineers. Okay, and that would come only with strong focus on foundation. Just like companies tend to over-index on training in their job description, at least, colleges tend to over-index on education, and rightly so. Okay, why? because when you are in job, there's nobody going to be around to walk you through the theory of things. Okay, there has to be a well-defined, focused effort into imparting education, which is the theoretical foundations of this field. Okay, so colleges correctly over-index on education. What that means is you have an opportunity to make sure you are putting in extra effort on the training piece of it. Okay, obviously, knowing what Scalar's curriculum is, they have tried to strike a balance between the education part of it and the training part of it, as colleges should, as engineering colleges should. But remember, 80% of your future is going to be dependent on what you do and not what your college actually creates. Okay, so college can at best create the right environment. To what degree you move on that direction is completely up to you. Okay, so focusing on the right balance between education and training is going to be important to you, important for you. The training part, which is how to do things, would come by you building out as much as you can. Whatever it is that you're learning, let's say you are learning about distributed systems at some point in time. Whatever n number of things that you can build out while you are here is going to be crucial in deeply internalizing those theoretical foundations. Otherwise, what will happen is the theory goes in one direction and the practice goes in another direction, and that is going to hurt your learning at an overall level. Okay. Another corollary to this, you've got to pursue learning by yourself and not limit yourself to college curriculum. Okay. And the reason is simple. The total volume of knowledge base in this field is actually extremely large. Okay. College curriculums are going to be limited by the amount of time that is available. Only n number of years can actually be put in, before you graduate, right? And there are only 24 hours in a day. So what they would do is they would figure out what are the most core concepts that we can impart to students. But the onus lies on you to not limit yourself to that. You've got to go, beyond that. Another tip to bear in mind is learning to learn without teachers. Okay, this is the teachers in any college, no matter how good they are going to sort of catalyze your thinking process, your learning process. Learning always happens by ourselves. Teachers are never there, and this is one misconception that our Indian school system sort of often ends up doing, that teachers are there to teach you. Teachers, no, learning actually happens only by ourselves. Teachers at best can catalyze our thought process to actually get us in the right frame of mind to learn. Okay. So examples of learning to learn without teachers: reading technical papers. You will come across something called RFCs, implementing, your own servers, going through a whole bunch of original source codes. All of these are great ways of learning by yourself. Okay. And I hope that a lot of you end up doing that. Another factor to bear in mind is, like I said, the industry knowledge is extremely wide. So there's a lot of things that happen in the industry which is not going to be possible to cover in a college curriculum. For example, recently I was at a systems engineering meetup where a concept called DST, deterministic simulation testing, actually came across. It's a concept related to distributed systems, and I see a lot of bright future in it in terms of how distributed systems of the future end up getting built out. Now, it may or may not show up in your curriculum, but the good thing is there's a whole bunch of open source projects that you can find which give you a great opportunity. I recently came across this, there's a guy called Vipul Vaibhav, who started writing, an implementation of Raft framework. Raft is a concept that is used in distributed consensus. It's something that you guys would read about in your distributed systems classes. And then you compare the performance of your implementation with what is out there. And that will teach you so much. Okay. And the reason why I'm mentioning, this project in particular is because I really liked the roadmap that he'd created. So he put out this open source code of Raft implementation by himself, and he laid out a roadmap in terms of what all things he would actually do. And all of those things are so cutting edge in the industry. I do not see those things actually showing up in a curriculum because, just they are way too advanced to actually show up in a curriculum. But you guys as individuals have the opportunity to identify such projects and begin contributing to it. My point is, the degree to which you shape your future is going to be limited by you. You are the biggest bottleneck in how your future ends up actually getting shaped. Bear that in mind. So that was about training versus education. The next thing I want to talk about is what does it take to be effective at building products. The society around us tends to be very quick in associating labels. You are a software engineer, you are a mathematician, you are a biologist, you are a doctor, you are a dentist. Okay. In reality, for software engineers, at least I can say that to build a product, to be good at building products, you need to understand the domain that you are in, which means habituating yourself to learning a lot more about how the world works beyond just the technical knowledge body. Okay. For example, if you're building for a financial, a fintech sort of a thing, understanding how money flows is a crucial skill. And if you don't have those skills, you would actually not be able to make the right design choices for the product that you are building. Okay. So habituating yourself to going beyond just the technical pieces and focusing as much on how the world around you works is going to be extremely important. Let's say for some reason you get a job in, let's say, a company working in molecular biology. You will need to understand things like, protein folding and stuff like that. Okay. So understanding the basics of things. Don't limit yourself to labels of software engineer or, software or software versus hardware. Oh, hardware is not my thing, so I shouldn't spend time studying that. Don't limit yourself. You've got to make sure that, you are liberating yourself to learn anything and everything under the sun. And something to bear in mind here is that the more you learn, the easier it gets, which means that the sooner you start, 5 years later, because of the compounding nature of things, you would actually be much better at learning things beyond technology than somebody who starts late. Okay, so the sooner you start, the better off you would be. Lastly, knowledge is a community thing. I think that's something that I think already was getting discussed. In school, we often get conditioned into competing with each other, right? Because there's a limited number of spots. So let's compete. So the tendency is to hoard information and not share. Okay. But guess what? Competition exists in market. The market is where competition plays out, not in knowledge building. Okay. If you look at the history of how different bodies of sciences have evolved across the world, bodies, by bodies I mean organizations and stuff like that, bodies which have a very liberal approach to knowledge sharing have developed the most amount of new concepts, new knowledge. Okay. So it's something to bear in mind that the more open you are, that much effective things are going to be in terms of learning. So share more, learn together, brainstorm together. I think those are some of the best ways to actually use your time here. Closing notes, a few closing notes about human behavior that I'd shared even in the previous commencement speech. Most of you will actually forget whatever I shared here. Okay. And that's fine. Like I said, my goal here is to plant some thoughts which will get activated when the right time actually shows up. But I do hope that at least some of you end up changing your actionables in some way based on what I shared just now. Second is, appearing smart is easier than being smart. And the reason I'm talking about it is, based on, again, how society around us is, it's a peculiar problem that I've seen in Indian setup, that when you're in the process of learning is very dirty. Okay, because there are lots of foolish mistakes and things like that that end up happening, and because we are conditioned to feel embarrassed about appearing foolish, it actually holds us back. Okay, unfortunately, there's no trick other than to just sort of embrace that embarrassment and just get comfortable with appearing foolish. But I do hope that some of you make that jump. Yeah, and remember that this time that you have here is the best time to dig into the foundations, the fundamentals. When you enter the industry, you'll have almost no time available. Okay, so time can always be created, but your ability to continue to learn is going to be determined by how much focus on fundamentals you spend here. Okay, so I really hope that all of you end up making good use of your time. Once in a while, I'll meet you guys. I've taken classes here at Scalar, so I'll most likely end up doing the same again this year. So I hope to see all of you in those classes as well. Thank you so much and all the best.